Alphabet City, notorious for crime.
There's a shooting every day in this town.
Addictions.
So often they'll use one needle 10 to 20 times and then they'll share it amongst a group of people.
Illness.
My life drastically changed when I contracted HIV.
And stigma.
We don't get that privilege to go through that front door.
But it's still a community.
People recognize you and people say hi, and I didn't experience that in other parts of the city.
With children, families, and neighbors. Station 20 West is a local hub with a variety of services for the community, and that is where we sat down and got to know a bit about LYNN Thompson.
I played professional ball and for 4 provincial teams in women's fastball. Was recruited when I was about 12 years old. I was playing in the field with some of my neighborhood friends, and a scout actually saw me. The one solid thing that was always there was baseball. You couldn't take that away from me. I was good at it. I was damn good at it, and you couldn't take that away from me. And I was actually praised, and I wasn't criticized, so I think baseball was my outlet.
LYNN didn't play ball in an Indigenous community.
I'm also a 60 scoop survivor, so that meant that I lived in 27 foster homes, 2 adoptions. All 27 foster homes, both adoptions, you were never acknowledged as a First Nations child. I didn't even know what I was. I just knew I had darker skin.
Who is LYNN?
Well, for a long time, I thought I was Mexican. I even moved to Mexico because that's where I thought my people were. And then I moved back to Canada. And then I thought, I was hanging around with black people, Jamaican people. As a 60 scooper, you're grasping at anything that you can attach yourself to. So if there was a brown group of people, you were like, maybe I'm a part of that group.
Yeah.
We also have many of our people that sleep in here.
She had at least 6 different names.
I was very much a little mini adult because I had to be, I never unpacked my bags. I always knew I would be moving in 1 week, 2 weeks, a month.
Finding her home wasn't easy.
We look alike, but we sounded different, we looked different, we dressed different. It's very hard for a 60 scooper to go home after living in the Caucasian world for most of their life. It's almost meeting like complete strangers.
And then her life's passion came to a screeching halt.
When I contracted HIV 20 years ago, that vastly changed my life. And then there was those precautions of blood. It's a bloodborne pathogen, so I was quite afraid of infecting other people if I got an injury or anything. So I thought it would be best for me to retire, and I did.
LYNN got HIV at a time when mostly men were exposed.
It was known as a gay man's disease. Gay white male man's disease is no longer that, and especially in our province of Saskatchewan. It's actually a young women Aboriginal disease. Our young women are contracting it at phenomenal rates.
All right.
Jason MERCREDI, Executive Director of AIDS Saskatoon, has worked in the community for years.
Men who have sex with men make up about 4% of new HIV infections. Predominantly it's people who are injecting drugs, but then the number 2 is people having heterosexual sex unprotected. And so, but I would say number 1 with a bullet for the last 10 plus years has been injection drug use.
Statistics show that Indigenous people are most commonly among the newly infected, and as of 2016, the gender gap for infections had closed, with males now making up just 56%. For LYNN, the ball diamond wasn't the only thing gone from her life.
I was shunned, very much shunned from my community. Lost many friends. Often had people spit on me, yell at me, call me a diseased bitch. was like, I might as well have just put HIV on my forehead. And it's still that way today. It is getting better, but the stigma and discrimination, even within the healthcare system itself, truly exists.
However, one healthcare professional stands out for Lynn.
So RISSY is going to come in here, and she was truly my arms and my legs and my navigator this summer because I was so sick. I was bedridden.
RISSY HANTKE is an educator with the University of Regina and lives in the core.
I've learned a lot from Lynn about what it's like in the neighborhood, the barriers that she faces in the services.
It's very frustrating. It's very lonely. And I don't know how I managed to navigate the system as I have done. I've created my own little navigation system.
I think the system's falling short, and I think that this community feels that more than some other communities might, just because the need is so apparent. Like when there's poverty, like everything else just increases, all the other problems increase so much more.
Poverty, among other things, is called a social determinant of health.
When we're talking about the social determinants of health, we're thinking about income and education and access to healthy early childhood development and all of these things that are they're kind of all the ingredients to a healthy life.
First time use. Just use it once because it's a very fine point. As soon as you hit something, it bends.
The core is like many Indigenous communities. Everyone knows each other.
They call me the white buffalo of HIV because I only use traditional medicine. I do not use Western medicine, and I've survived 20 years. Yeah.
There isn't much science on the use of traditional medicine in the treatment of HIV and AIDS, but it's worked for Lynn.
Jackie from Twig and Squirrels. She often gets a lot of my traditional medicines brought in.
Over here, Lynn. This is the chaga that's really awesome for doing Saskatchewan. So this is our local Saskatchewan chaga. Brew it for a couple hours in a slow cooker or on the stove.
Okay. And it's for my immune system.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Would you like
Jackie JENSON is the owner of this general store with a twist.
Take it over to Olivia. Okay.
Perfect. Thank you.
It caters to the local First Nations community.
Lynn has been a link within the community as a proactive member on many fronts. That's how I know Lynn.
Is Lynn more than a customer?
Oh, absolutely. She's a friend.
JENSON says she really didn't know much about the core until becoming part of the community, and she sees the stigma that Lynn feels.
I feel emotional about it because I've made those personal connections with people, and I've grown to understand the depths of the struggles here.
Oh, hi, Lynn.
My gloves.
Thank you. I'm so glad to have these for the show.
And then we went to a local gallery where Lynn dropped off mitts she made for a display.
I like them not just like they're static, right?
Yeah.
Like they're reaching or something.
Okay, perfect.
Like that.
I like it. I like it.
Okay.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
And much is hidden in the open.
So this is where our methadone clinic is. We have many methadone clinics.
And then to the back alleys.
As long as I've lived here, we've known this as Chinaman Alley. That's where our sex trade workers and our young women will go, rather than being on 20th. And then that's where they get picked up. And again, this used to be Chinatown. It's no longer Chinatown. And they've created these new organizations, businesses, and we call it gentrification. Or we call it whiteification. And they just keep shoving us up the hill. Here's some remnants of some coke. But these are the little packs. And they'll often go and sell in the back. Cause we don't sell in the front on the street. Most of the stuff is done in the back alleys.
Back on 20th Street, we encountered some seemingly abandoned buildings.
Like we're hauling people left, right, center out of these buildings. They finally shut this one down. Yeah. But as you can see, they still break in there and go in there.
Apparently squatters too. When my camera person was loading the gear, I saw a shirtless toddler come out onto a second floor balcony. Signs of drug use and sex work were apparent on the street. And so were signs of violence.
Is that a knife? There's a knife. It's got writing on it too. We could probably call the cops because some of this stuff is weapons.
Next, We look at that violence and the response to it.
Our community's afraid. Well, we've had like 5 shootings in the last 3 days. And all in my area. And then the courting, we're very afraid of the police here. Extremely afraid of them. I think all they're trying to maintain is just their addiction. I don't think they can think beyond. Does someone care about me and my First Nations? I think that's all lost. They're just desperado people.
High crime areas, you're going to have a bigger police presence. That's just the reality of it.
Sanctums are down here. Police are monitoring us. The other house across the street.
Riversdale and Pleasant Hill are high crime areas. The police are a common sight. Ernie LOUTTIT is a Cree man, retired police officer, public speaker, and author. Ernie testified at the Stonechild inquiry.
And that's when he told me that Neil had died.
A 2004 inquiry into the 1990 freezing death of Neil Stonechild.
His death prompted an inquiry and the justice made recommendations on how to improve the relations between First Nations and police in Saskatoon.
Among the inquiry recommendations are that police have in-depth race relations and dispute resolution training, better recruitment and promotion of Indigenous officers, and a clear complaint process.
It resonated through the province, through Manitoba, Alberta, and rippled all the way across this country and changed the way police do their policing.
No justice!
Now, 15 years later, we had an interview interrupted by a protest against police violence. We spoke to Saskatoon Police Service Chief Troy Cooper.
You know, I think that there are a percentage of the population that have had negative interactions with the police, and that's unfortunate, but I don't think that's a very large population. We do surveys to make sure that we understand what our relationship is, and we know that we have a 93% in our survey about people who find the police were respectful in their interactions. So I think generally we're doing a great job in Saskatoon, but there's always going to be those members of the community, I think, that have had some kind of discomfort or an interaction that they're unhappy with, and we do our best to try and continue to build those relationships and try and address those specific instances for sure.
One issue is what is commonly referred to as carding or street checks. In policing, it's often called a contact interview. LOUTTIT feels it's an essential part of policing.
But the police need to know who's who in a community. And the only way you can do that is by stopping people and asking who they are. Everybody has a name, including the bad guys, but everybody has a name, including the good people. And sometimes the only way for police to know the difference is to ask them.
Standards for contact interviews were put in place in early 2019, but those standards allow for exposure to policing just by being homeless in a commercial area.
And I used to catch kids running down the alleys, or I'd pull into with my patrol car and I'd see these kids in the alleys, and they would dive and hide and run. I'd always catch one, and he said, "What are you running for?" Right? Because you check them and they got no warrants. And they told me that they felt safer in the alleys than they did on the street, because the gang guys could see them on the street.
We took a drive through some of these known gang areas with Lynn.
This is the worst of the worst. This is like the gang alley. This is full gang territory. Like, this blows my mind. Anyways, we have huge gang problems. Really sad to watch these people, hey? It's almost like they have no hope or don't even know what hope is.
LOUTTIT admits it's a challenge for policing.
You're going to have police that have to learn how to be tactful, You know, you just can't expect a young constable that's constantly trained to have his head on the swivel and to not have a little bit of trepidation when dealing with 4 or 5 young people in the dark in an alley. So the stakes are high.
The gang presence is undeniable, and it contributes to the violence. But what about those with addictions being criminalized? Lynn says they're treated like trash.
So this is the back end of the needle exchange. As you can see, it's against all the garbage bins. The methadone clinic is right beside the garbage bin, and that's what really bothers me in this province, is that we're still considered the bottom of the barrel, scum, garbage. And this is about our only place that we can get needles. We do have a rig van that does come out in the evenings and goes through different locations through the city, but this is our main one. And again, we don't practice full harm reduction. You have to have a needle to get a needle.
We spoke to Jason MERCREDI, director of AIDS Saskatoon, who offered his insight into needle exchanges.
Some people think that means a one-to-one needle exchange, so that means if I have a needle, I can get a needle, and those are actually shown that they don't actually decrease the HIV rate. What you need to have is fairly open access, and you need to have a good relationship with people who are using drugs so that they want to bring needles back and engage in services with you.
With harm reduction, particularly needle exchanges, comes healthier outcomes for the addicted. But is harm reduction with accountability about broken windows theory? The idea that crime is drawn to rundown areas? Or is it also about health?
Nobody wants to find a needle in their backyard, you know, or in their front yard. And so I do think that is the case in Saskatchewan, but that doesn't mean that we can't be meeting both, right? I think a robust needle pickup program is needed, you know, and mobilizing community. Needle drop boxes throughout the community are vital, but I think we have to make sure that the primary goal is reducing HIV infections and engaging people in care.
So, a needle exchange is one thing, but what about where to shoot up?
This back alley becomes very active. And again, we don't have a safe injection site. This used to be one of our shooting galleries, so they'll inject in the back here.
Oh, yeah. What's a shooting gallery?
A shooting gallery is a place where they'll go and be able to inject without having police around, or they can do it in the privacy with other people.
Louttit describes one encounter he had at a shooting gallery.
There was one particular apartment building, and it was notorious. You'd go in this place, and there would be needles on the stairs. There would be needles in the walls. There was needles in the false ceilings. There was needles everywhere. Blood-filled, broken capped, not capped. It was unbelievable.
Are safe injection sites the answer?
Safe injection sites, I think, could work. I'm not a big fan of them because, to me, all you're doing is facilitating organized crime. I'm not that naive to think that we can eradicate drug traffickers, but if, as First Nations people, we need to do everything we can to use First Nations teachings to get the people that distribute it, traffic it, and make money and profit off of killing their own people out of our communities, either by shaming or by having them change their ways.
It isn't always dealers. Opiates can be obtained for free.
And a lot of that is due to prescribed drugs that are prescribed by our very doctors in this province. So yeah, this is like the hubbub of it all. Avenue P and 20th, and you can actually just sit here, probably at that park, watch all this transaction happen. You get the meds there, go here, get the prescription filled, go around the corner, get your needles. So this is the hubbub of it all.
Some harm reduction advocates want police to target users less.
Unfortunately, a lot of people that are using and addicted commit secondary crimes.
And cheaper drugs are more popular.
Crystal meth. Yes, we have crystal meth because it's quite affordable, but it's definitely not cocaine and heroin. I don't know of anyone that can afford that. Most of it is prescribed drugs because it's free.
But once meth came on the scene, wow, I thought The cocaine outbreak in the West was Wild West. With methamphetamine, it's like there's a shooting every day in this town now, and it wasn't like that when I was policing. We had a shooting maybe once a month.
Chief Cooper agrees.
Absolutely. Crystal meth, if there's one issue in our community that we're challenged with as far as addictions, crystal meth is that. We see it across the province, so we certainly see it in Saskatoon, and it's been identified not just as a policing issue, of course, but as a mental health issue, as a health issue in general, and it's impacting a lot of our different systems.
LYTT says the purchase of illegal drugs is still a crime, and that might be what gets a person help.
A lot of addicts will not, and I know this from experience, will not seek treatment until they're cornered. And unfortunately, cornered for a lot of addicts means the cops, arrested, charged, in the system.
What about, but there's also a segment that just simply doesn't want to be treated. They want to keep using.
That's true.
Should that be criminalized?
See, yeah, it's a good question, though. Good question. Yeah, should that be criminalized? If the act of addiction itself is the purchase of illegal drugs, we still charge bootleggers.
HIV itself isn't without criminalizing aspects, like having to report to health professionals.
For me, it's like, oh, don't poke me, don't prod me anymore, quit researching me, quit analyzing me. You know, that's how I feel. So I tend not to go, but I also know in the back of my head, I have legal obligations.
And illness does not provide an escape from violence.
As you can see in my face, I'm missing a couple of teeth, and you can see some of these scars. These are scars that happened about 5 years ago. I was just jumped on 22nd because I was HIV positive, and they kept calling me a disease bitch, and I was attacked. They actually split my whole face in half. We do have that huge amount of fear and stigma still attached to a person that comes out publicly.
In all of this, Lynn's outlook still shines.
Yes, I am HIV positive, but I am a positive person. I'm not about death and disease and needles and junkies. I'm not that. I'm a beautiful Aboriginal person that makes an impact in my community, and so does everyone else out there.
And just maybe, illness and stigma don't have to completely shatter someone's dreams.
I have now gone back, as of last year, up in Pleasant Hill. I do coach little T-ball, so I'm actually kind of excited about that.
Next week on APTN Investigates.
If you ever tell anyone about the things I have done to you, I will find you and I will kill you.
Certain staff members had a fondness for us. The nuns